who had been a hostage at Rome. And he reigned in the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks. Okay? Now, Daniel 8:24. And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. And he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. Who are the mighty and the holy people? Israel, the seed of Alahiym. So if he's talking about going against the seed of Alahiym, guess what? He must represent the seed of the serpent. So when it said, but not by his own power, now take your mind back to Revelation, right? When it talks about how the great dragon gave that beast, right, his power, his seat, great authority. In other words, it's like he gave his name. Okay? In 1 Maccabees chapter 1 still, picking up in verse 11, it says, in those days, now listen to this part. Shema Israel, listen. In those days went there out of Israel wicked men. You got the two sides. If you part of the seed of the serpent, if you part of the seed of Alahiym, the line has been drawn, right? In those days went there out of Israel wicked men. They were Israelites by birth. Okay? They weren't adopted into the body of Messiah, the seed of Alahiym. They were Israelite by birth, by blood. And let's make this clear. This was before a white Jew existed. So you're talking about black Hebrews, Israelites, Jews. Understand this. Okay? They were people of color. In those days went there out of Israel wicked men, who persuaded many, saying, let us go and make a covenant with the heathen that are round about us. For since we departed from them, we have had much sorrow. Listen to that. So this device pleased them well. Then certain of the people were so forward herein, that they went to the king, who gave them license to do after the ordinances of the heathen. This is Israel he talking about. Whereupon they built a palace of exercise at Jerusalem, according to the customs of the heathen, and made themselves uncircumcised, and forsook the holy covenant, and joined themselves to the heathen, and was sold to do mischief. This is Israel now. This is historical. And because it's historical, guess what else it is? It is prophetic. Israel not just doing this here. Israel is doing the exact same thing right here, right now, present day, present time. Making leagues and agreement with the heathen and forsaking the holy covenant. They are doing that today. Nothing has changed. Let's go back to Daniel chapter 8, verse 25. And this is still talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, or Antiochus Epiphanes. I had to look up how to pronounce that name correctly. But Daniel 8:25. And through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand. Now that phrase, he shall cause craft, it comes from our other term up here on the board. 4820 in the Hebrew lexicon, the word is mirma, and the word means deceit or fraud. Think about that. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceives the whole world. So the fact that through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand. He's going to cause deceit. He's going to cause fraud to prosper in his hand. Think about that. And and he shall magnify himself in his heart. Think about who he's taken after. Right? Think about, he said, I am going to do this, and I am going to do that, and I am going to do this, and I am going to do that. And what we see is being played out through this individual. Give me 1 second. I just want to show this one thing. Isaiah chapter 14. Listen to what he said. In verse 13, he said, for you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of Alahiym. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. But now, this is a person who did this. Listen to what it said he did. Let me just go back up real quick. Listen to what it says he did. In Daniel chapter 8, verse 10. And it waxed great, even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the hosts and of the stars to the ground and stamped upon them. Listen to this. Making comparisons. That's all we're doing. Seeing what it says in one place, comparing spiritual things with spiritual things. That's what we're doing. Let's go back. Daniel chapter 8:25. And through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. By peace shall destroy many. And one other point about the term mirma. The term signifies the intentional misleading of someone else through distorting or withholding the truth. Let me read that again. The term signifies the intentional misleading of someone else through distorting or withholding the truth. So if a name is changed, guess what you have done? You have distorted. You are withholding the truth. If the man's name was not Jesus when he was born in this world, and it was Yahushua, you are withholding this truth. You have distorted it by changing it to this. But we'll get to all of that. First Maccabees chapter 1 still, but we're going to drop down to verse 21. Listen to what it says. And it's talking about, again, Antiochus Epiphanes. And entered proudly into the sanctuary and took away the golden altar and the candlestick of light and all the vessels thereof, and the table of the showbread and the pouring vessels and the vials and the censers of gold and the veil and the crown and the golden ornaments that were before the temple, all which he pulled off. He took also the silver and the gold and the precious vessels. Also he took the hidden treasures which he found. And when he had taken all away, he went into his own land, having made a great massacre and spoken very proudly. You hear that? Think about that. Now, when it's given all of the different things that's taken as far as the furnishings from the temple, you know what that all points to? Again, the destruction of worship. There's so much that needs to be taught in regard to what Abba has legislated, commanded in regard to how we are to serve him, how we are to approach him. We talked about some things in Wayikra, Leviticus, the way of approach. We can't just offer any kind of worship to the Most High and expect him to accept it. We saw that in the example of Cain and Abel. Cain represented the seed of the serpent, and his worship was not accepted. But look at what's happening here. This is the seed of the serpent. And what is the serpent doing? It is destroying the worship that Abba gave to Israel. That has to be restored. The things people are doing out here in the world, and they're calling it worship, Abba didn't sanction that. It has to be according to his will. That's like he said. What he said, give me a second. Let me go to one more passage. And I'm going to finish this out. Romans chapter 9. Listen to what we learned. And we went through this. He says, let's start at verse 3 to get the thought. For I could wish that myself were accursed for Messiah, for my brethren, my kinsmen according to the flesh, who are Israelites, to whom pertaineth the adoption and the glory, and the covenant, and the giving of the law, and the service. Now when it says, and the service, what it's talking about? It's talking about the divine service. In other words, the worship. The true worship was given to Israel. How to approach the Most High. It was given to Israel. Matter of fact, you look up that term, korban. That's what it means. It ties into our approach. Let's get back. What we're learning here is that he's destroying the worship. Now, we're going to drop down to 1 Maccabees, still chapter 1, but in verse 41, we're going to read some things. Now listen to this. Pay attention to this. What's happening? Moreover, now, and also, let me just add this. This is a representation of the seed of the serpent. Moreover, King Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people, and everyone should leave his laws. So all the heathen agreed according to the commandment of the king. Yea, many also of the Israelites consented to his religion. So anytime I hear a Hebrew, an Israelite, or a Jew fighting to maintain the name that was not given to the Messiah, think about that. Verse 43 again. Yea, many also of the Israelites consented to his religion, and sacrificed unto idols, and profaned the Sabbath. So many ways you can go with that, but just pay attention. Verse 44. For the king has sent letters by messengers unto Jerusalem and the cities of Yahudah, that they should follow the strange laws of the land, and forbid burnt offerings and sacrifice and drink offerings in the temple, and that they should profane the Sabbaths and festival days, and pollute the sanctuary and holy people, set up altars and groves and chapels of idols, and sacrifice swine's flesh and unclean beasts, that they should also leave their children uncircumcised, and make their souls abominable with all manner of uncleanness and profanation, to the end they might forget the Torah and change all the ordinances. Now, the reason why I say this little horn is different from the little horn in Daniel chapter 7, because it is. But what we can also do, we can learn what the little horn in Daniel chapter 7 is going to do by comparing what this man did. In Daniel chapter 7, verse 25, it states, talking about that little horn. And he, let me just give you this explanation too before I even say that. The difference between those two little horns, you have the Grecian Empire, you have the Roman Empire. This little horn is an offshoot from the Grecian Empire. The little horn in Romans chapter 7 is an offshoot from the Roman Empire. So there's two different little horns, but we can compare them because they basically, or essentially, are going to do the same thing, but it's still two different individuals or two different entities. Okay? Now, in Daniel chapter 7:25, it's talking about that little horn, but what it says, he shall think to change times and laws. But look at what this little horn is doing. Again, verse 49, to the end they might forget the Torah and change all the ordinances. And whosoever would not do according to the commandment of the king, he said he should die. Now, I'm going to go back up to the one thing in 1 Maccabees chapter 1, verse 41, when it says that all should be one people. Now, what this does, this introduces to us the idea of what's called Hellenism. Okay? Hellenism. I'm going to write it up on the board so you can look this up. I'm going to read the definition to you anyway. But when you get your spare time, look it up. Hellenism. Okay? I'm going to read some things to you. Hellenism is the term used to describe the influence of Greek culture on the peoples the Greek and Roman empires conquered or interacted with. Upon the Jews' return from exile in Babylon, they endeavored to protect their national identity by following the law closely. This led to the rise of the hyper-conservative Pharisees and their added unnecessary laws. About 100 years after the Jews' return, Alexander the Great swept across Western Asia, extending his territory from his native Greece down into Egypt and east to the border of India. The influence of the Greek culture continued past the 1st century before Common Era, when the Roman Empire took control of Israel. The Pharisees' rival sect, the Sadducees, welcomed the Greek influence. Now this is what we got to understand. Pharisees, or the Perushim, right? They had the Sadducees, which is the Zadokim, right? These were all Israelites. They were Israelites. It says, let me read that again. The Pharisees' rival sect, the Sadducees, welcomed the Greek influence. The Sadducees were wealthy, powerful Jewish aristocrats who openly worked with their Gentile rulers to maintain peace and ensure a measure of political clout. All Jews were influenced by Greek culture. However, the Greek language was as well known as the native Aramaic. The Jewish leadership changed from the God-ordained priesthood to the Sadducee-controlled Sanhedrin. And the law of the land more closely reflected Grecian laws than those given through Mosheh. You see what's happening? This was way back then. Hellenism also expressed itself in minor ways, such as Saul taking the name Paul. Hellenism had a great influence during the early years of Christianity. Now we're going to touch on that. What they call in Christianity here is actually what I would refer to as Messianism, or the belief in the Messiah. Okay? Or simply put, the way. Hellenism had a great influence during the early years of the way. Sometimes the influence was felt indirectly, safe roads for the missionaries, and sometimes directly, theological synergism. Here are a few ways Hellenism affected the way. Now, I'm just going to read this one example, and then we're going to touch on how it affected it in the next segment, okay? Because it's going to have an impact. Now, the one way that Hellenism affected it, you have the Septuagint. Now, let me just, before I even mention that, in the Torah, Yahuwah said this through Mosheh, and he said it, I believe, through Brother Shlomo. Pay attention. You shall not add anything to my word. You shall not take anything away from my word. Don't add nothing to it. Don't take anything away from it. Don't add, don't take away. No additions, no subtractions. You get the point. Okay? Up until this time, the Chumash, Navi'im, Ketuvim, the Old Testament, if you will, was Hebrew. Okay? This right here, what I'm about to read, marks the first time in history that it would be changed. So, one of the ways Hellenism affected the way, the Septuagint. During the time Jews were dispersed to Babylon and points farther, many lost the ability to speak and read Hebrew and thus could not read the scriptures. With the establishment of Greek as the universal language, think about that. Something's happening. Take your mind back to Genesis, Bereshit, chapter 11. But the scripture said that the whole land was of one language and one speech, right? At that time, because it was just one language, there was no need to say it's this or it's that. Everybody spoke the same, so there was no need to identify. It was just a language, the tongue, etc. But historically speaking now, what we come to find out is that the language that's being referred to in Genesis chapter 11 was Ibri, or Hebrew. That's the original language that humanity was given. That's the language that Abba spoke to man in. That's the language that he inspired his word to be written in. That's why when we get to, again, when we talk about understanding the Torah, the accepting that it's written by inspiration, the accepting that the teacher has to teach by inspiration, the accepting that the word was entrusted to Israel, and the accepting that it was initially written in Hebrew. Okay? Now, what we're learning right here is that at this time, because of Hellenism, and let's go back up to what it says in Maccabees 1:41. Moreover, Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people. Now, because of that, you have this idea with the establishment of Greek as the universal language, a solution presented itself. From the 3rd century before Common Era to 132 before Common Era, Jewish scholars translated the Hebrew scriptures into Greek. Let me repeat that. Jewish scholars translated the Hebrew scriptures into Greek. They supposed to know better if that's the case. They were supposed to know better. Some of you probably hear this and say, well, I don't see what the problem is for them making a translation so that people in other languages can learn about the word of the Most High. I get you. I hear that. See, no, what you do, you're using your reason, you're using your logic. I got you. Right? But you don't know what happened as a result of this taking place. And we're going to get into that in the next segment. It says, the resulting text, called the Septuagint, is what most of the New Testament writers quote. For example, something else for you to think about. When it comes to the books of the Bible, right? Now, throughout the course of the teachings, you'll hear me say different things, different names, right? So, if I'm introducing Genesis, I'm going to say Bereshit. Because that's what it was actually called, Bereshit, based on the first word in the book. Bereshit, bara Alahiym. In the beginning created Alahiym, or mighty ones. Okay? But in the Septuagint, it's called Genesis. Same thing here. This is what we're familiar with. Exodus. That's what we're familiar with. But actually it's called Shemut, which means names. Why names? Think about it. There is a book in the Torah called names, but then you have people saying, well, names are not that important. It doesn't make a difference what you call. Then why is there even a book called names? Why? Because there are 3 prominent names that are brought forth in this book, in this writing, in the Torah. 3 prominent names. The name of the Father and the names of the Word. We'll talk about that another time. Okay? Now, this excerpt that I just read, it comes from gotquestions.org. And the article is, what is Hellenism and how did it influence the early church? Once again, Got Questions, and it's spelled exactly the way it sounds, gotquestions.org. What is Hellenism and how did it influence the early church? So, let me just finish this last part again and then I'm done. It says, Jewish scholars translated the Hebrew scriptures into Greek. The resulting text, called the Septuagint, is what most of the New Testament writers quote. It also introduced the Greek word Christ for the Hebrew Messiah. Okay? Now, what does Hellenism have to do with who Jesus the Christ is? Right? The campaign of the opponent was to remove the name Yahweh from Holy Scripture, thereby altering every name that was connected to it. And when we get into our next segment, we're going to see some examples of that, because that is of major importance. Because the fact that they did that, you know what they just did? They just took something they subtracted something from the word and they put something else there in its place. When they did that, you know what they just did? They have changed, they have altered it. They contaminated it. They polluted it. And it eventually led to us getting Jesus the Christ. I'm going to stop right here for right now. Hallelujah! Beshem Yahushua HaMashiach. Abba, in the name of your Son, I give praise, glory, and honor, and I thank you for the opportunity that you have given me, the privilege to stand before you and to stand before your people and to speak your word, Abba, according to your will. Once again, I ask that you forgive me for my sins that I have committed against you, and that you cleanse me by the blood of Yahushua. And I pray on behalf of Israel that you forgive us, Abba, that you cast our sin into the sea of forgetfulness, and that you strengthen each and every one of us by your Spirit, that we become more obedient to your voice and submissive to your divine will. Abba, when we go astray to the right or to the left, Abba, through your loving kindness, I beseech you to chastise those whom you love. In Yahushua's holy and most precious name, I pray that those who should hear the words of this teaching